What's good, creative fam? Brandon Washington here, and I have officially had the red v-raptor for just over a month. Now, over this time, I've done a lot of testing with this camera, as well as taking it out on a handful of client projects. Now, over this time, my goal has been to really understand what this camera can do. And so in this video, I'm gonna be breaking down some of my findings, and I'll also tell you guys one major hiccup that I've been having with this camera. Now, before we jump into how this footage actually looks, we gotta quickly talk about the elephant in the room, and that is getting a computer that can process this image. Now, of course, you're going to need a computer that has some power, and thanks to today's video sponsor, Dell, with the Precision 5750 workstation, I have been able to successfully edit and work on this 8K raw footage natively on my computer. Now, I will say, I like to do a lot of my color grading, especially when it comes to working with Red Raw in DaVinci Resolve, and being able to work on DaVinci Resolve on this workstation is a dream. It cuts through the footage like butter, and the real-time 8K raw video playback is largely made possible by the NVIDIA RTX 3000 GPU and the internal high-speed NVMe SSDs. That, in addition to the 4K screen, makes editing on this machine a dream. And so if you are interested in getting a very powerful professional workstation, definitely check out the links in the description. And thanks again, Dell, for sponsoring this video. So my goal for this video is to actually be just completely transparent with you guys when it comes to working with this footage. I'm gonna be pulling up certain clips here on my workstation and just sharing it with you guys and just going through what these shots are. Let's go ahead and bring up one of the first tests that I actually shared with you guys already on YouTube, and that was our skin tone test. Now, one of the first things that I noticed with working with some of this footage was just how clean the shadows were when working with this setup. Now, granted, we lit this scene, we used, fill light, and we used some key and hair light and everything to create like that perfect interview setup. And personally, I think that the footage turned out really, really well with this first initial test. Now, this was our first time using the camera and shooting with it, and honestly, it did not disappoint. This is actually one of the things that we looked at and we kind of compared to the Komodo on that same day, was that we noticed that the Raptor had really, really clean shadows. Now, when I posted this initially online, a lot of people actually said that they liked the look of the Komodo. And I think that's just because I literally didn't color either one of those shots. I just put the native Rec 709 LUT on both of these shots, and this is what you got. But personally, I think if you played around with this footage, which I will be providing these shots down below in the description, you will see that the Raptor gives you so much latitude in post. Now, shooting an interview is just one stage of shooting a lot of corporate video. One of the big ones is shooting B-roll. Now, we've been shooting a lot of B-roll with the Red Raptor as our test. Because of the type of videos that we shoot, we get a chance to find ourselves in a lot of different situations. Sometimes we're shooting, out on a golf course. Sometimes we're shooting a food truck. Sometimes we're shooting in a business establishment. It really varies from shoot to shoot. But I will say, when I look at what this Red Raptor is pulling off, especially in broad daylight, it completely blows me away. Not too long ago, we were shooting outdoors in broad daylight at a golf course. And one thing that completely blew me away was how fantastic the dynamic range was in this shooting scenario. As you can see from this footage with these interviews, we are shooting outdoors just in the shade, so we don't have direct sunlight hitting our subject, but we are keeping all of this dynamic range throughout the entire shot. We are keeping the sky, we're keeping the reflections on the water, we're keeping all the greenery, and of course, we're keeping our subject properly lit, and we're getting all this dynamic range so that way we can have a shot that is very, very usable in post. And most cameras are just unable to do this, but with this camera, you absolutely have all the dynamic range you need in order to adjust. Now, of course, we are shooting in RAW, so there's so much latitude that you have in post, but having this full frame look and having all this great dynamic range coming out of this camera completely blew me away. Now, it was on this exact same shoot where we tested out for the very first time doing any type of high frame rate shooting. And this is where one of the biggest issues that I have found with this camera really started to creep in. See, while filming, we were shooting a lot of B-roll at the golf tournament, and I was shooting a lot of high frame rate because, I mean, well, let's face it, it's golf. But what I started realizing was really this camera kept stopping on me because of recording errors. Now, full transparency, when I purchased this camera, I also purchased my media from Red. So I have the Red branded CF Express card, and for whatever reason, I was unable to consistently shoot at these higher frame rates. I kept getting this error message on my camera. And for me, it really was more of an issue because every time I thought I was filming, the camera would stop filming on its own. So then when I would press the button to stop, I would actually start filming another take. And then when I press stop on that one, thinking I was starting the next shot, I was actually stopping the previous shot. So as you can imagine, it was really a huge headache. So one thing that I would strongly recommend you guys wait on, or at least keep in mind, is that this camera does do a fantastic job when it is able to capture those high frame rate shots. But I will say that at least with my 660 gigabyte CFast Express card, I consistently ran into issues with the camera stopping itself when recording. And I will also say that I'm pretty sure it has to do with how full the card is, because the more full the card, the more issues I ran into. Now, I did make it through that entire golf shoot and was able to get everything that we needed. So the next thing I wanted to do was actually go out and test it even further. And so I took an entire day to go out and film with this camera in high frame rates in order for me to see kind of what that dynamic range would do. If I dropped into lower resolutions, did that make it easier? Because the way that the Raptor works is as you actually drop into lower resolution, it starts to slowly crop in on the sensor. This means that there's less data for the camera to actually process. But also on the flip side, because there's less data from the sensor coming in, it also allows you to then film at higher frame rates. So I went out and tested a slew of different frame rates with this camera. And something that I found that was really interesting was the fact that yes, you were able to get higher frame rates at lower resolutions, but I really started to see a diminishing in returns when it came to the overall sharpness of those images. Yes, I was able to shoot at over 200 frames per second if I dropped down below 4K, but was it really worth it? Because the image was so soft and it just did not look as well as it looked in 8K at 120 frames per second. So I wanted to test all these different frame rates, and what it really came down to for me was that probably the smallest resolution that I'm probably ever gonna shoot the Raptor in is most likely gonna be the 6K at the Super 35mm sensor size. I find that that is kind of the Raptor's last real sweet spot when it comes to getting a really sharp and crisp image. And a lot of that can have to do with the type of lenses that you're using or really how much file size you want to deal with. But personally, I find that if you are going to get this camera, I do recommend shooting at either 8K full frame wide open or cropping down to that 6K Super 35mm sensor, especially if you're going to be filming at those higher frame rates. And the last thing that I tested while I was out there was I wanted to do an extreme dynamic range test. And in this test, I actually found that this camera does a fantastic job at preserving those highlight details. Now, obviously you're gonna need to, do your own tests and maybe do some of your own color grading. And obviously I believe that better colorists are going to be able to have a better experience working on this footage than even I was. But I will say that I do believe that because this camera gives you so much detail in those highlights and it is able to preserve so much information in the shadows, but more importantly, give you very clean shadows, you are going to be able to get as much information as you could possibly want or desire out of this sensor. Now, obviously, the huge elephant in the room is the fact that, well, Brandon, of course this camera should be great. It's freaking $30,000, which I 100% agree with you. But I don't see most people actually purchasing this camera. I see most people actually renting this camera. I think this is a fantastic camera for you to be able to rent, especially if you're going to be shooting anything that requires high frame rate or extreme dynamic range situations. And because of the build and size and overall functionality of this camera and how versatile it is and how modular you can build this thing out to be, I really do think that this is a solid camera for a lot of productions to consider renting. Now, if you already own a Komodo, one thing that you're really gonna love is just how easy of a transition going from the Komodo to the Raptor actually is. The only real downside is that the Komodo gives you this amazing touchscreen interface where the Raptor unfortunately doesn't give you that. But other than that, really working with the footage and being able to use it and test it out and playing around with it, the two cameras are really a great pair. I've been running one as my main A cam and kind of using it as a handheld, that being the Raptor, and then running my B cam being my Komodo on things like a slider and a gimbal. And I find that this 1-2 punch combo really does allow me to have some amazing footage and give me a very versatile working experience. Again, I don't expect anybody to purchase this camera. This video is not to try to convince you to purchase this camera, but I do think that as a creator, it's good for you to know what tools are out there, what tools exist, so that way you can choose to use the best tool you need for your project. Now, as promised, I am gonna be giving you guys access to some of these shots. So do me a huge favor, check out the links in the description where you can actually download this footage and play with it yourself. I'm gonna be uploading the raw clips, the absolute raw clips, so that way you guys can play with it. So they're not compressed in any way. So just make sure that you're working in some type of pro editor, whether that's Premiere or Final Cut or DaVinci like I do here on the Dell Precision 5750. Also, make sure that you download Red's new Cine X Pro plugin. There is a new plugin specifically to let the Raptor work in your system, so make sure you download that. And then also do me a huge favor, if you guys play around with this footage and you color grade it, you cut something together, share it with me. I would love to see what you guys actually end up creating. At the end of the day, this channel is all about helping you guys, teaching you, and showing you guys kind of what is all out there. And so if you get any type of value from this video and you're able to become a better editor, or you just get a chance to play around with some new footage, please do me a favor, share that information with me. I would love to also share that information out there to others. But thank you guys so much for checking out this video. I hope that it's been helpful for you. If you enjoyed it, give it a big thumbs up. If you really enjoyed it, make sure you hit that subscribe button, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace.